Welcome back, everyone, and we hope everyone had a hale and hearty lunch. There's a slight change in the session in the afternoon, for which I would like to request the speaker, Professor Matthew Chandra Kunal, Professor of Philosophy of Science at the Dharmaram Vidya Kshetram, Bangalore, who will be speaking on the ontology and epistemology of reality according to quantum mechanics and Madhyamaka Buddhism, and the chair for this session, Professor Rajaram Nityananda, Professor at Azim Premji University, to kindly come up on the stage. I would request Professor Nityananda to initiate the session.
So, welcome everybody to this afternoon session. You would have already gone through the abstract of the talk which Matthew Chandra Kunal is going to give us. And it continues on this theme coming now from the side of quantum physics. But actually, quantum physics being quite old, there is a long tradition of people who have thought about the interpretation of quantum mechanics. What does it really mean to split measurement into an observer and an apparatus on the one hand, system on the other, and so on? What is called the Copenhagen interpretation, which came very early. And of course, that field has not stayed still. There have been many views on this, and I think I look forward to hearing what our speaker has to say. So from my personal side, let me just add that one of the people whose name was mentioned earlier, John Bell, perhaps one of the deepest thinkers about what quantum mechanics is and what it is not. And in particular, he derived these inequalities which were mentioned in the morning, which distinguish in a fundamental way between our earlier notions of what is real and what quantum mechanics predicts, right? And one of the interesting points of view which John Bell has mentioned in his writings, and I had the good fortune to hear him as well when he visited Bangalore, is deep dissatisfaction with the Copenhagen interpretation, in the sense that it brings in elements which seem to be connected with our status as conscious observers. It talks of measurement and events and so on, but a more satisfying theory would be one in which everything was placed on the same footing, because we are also made up of atoms. And I really look forward to the talk and the discussion, which I hope will regenerate debate on these age-old questions.
Good afternoon. Your Holiness, Professor Rajaram Nityananda, esteemed guests and scholars. I am grateful to the organizers of this wonderful conference, and especially His Holiness Dalai Lama and Professor Sen and Sopori for having this wonderful dialogue between physics and philosophy and spirituality and religion. And I think that science needs its others, humanities and religion and spirituality. So this is a wonderful occasion to present from these two perspectives, the ontology and the epistemology, searching for the reality. I am grateful to Your Holiness for instructing me once to teach your monks physics. And I have done that. I went to the Seraje monastery and I was teaching your monks, and I found that how it was fascinating, and I also learned from them meditation. And also, 2 years ago, you came to Bangalore and gave a wonderful lecture on science and religion, and instructed our brothers the need of meditation. So I think that this is a wonderful dialogue between science, philosophy, religion, spirituality, which I think we need. So the way I am proceeding with my lecture is that I will present in the larger frame how science, especially the physics and quantum mechanics, is searching for the reality. Initially, it was a search for the ontological, that means, the entities. And then it is going on to from the macroscopic to the microscopic level. And then we see that, how the consciousness is constructing the reality, as we have heard from the beginning, the first lecture by Professor Bitbol. And then also the second one about the Chittamatra, that is from the Buddhist tradition. I also place from the Buddhist tradition from Abhidharma onwards. And if I am making any kind of heresy, Your Holiness, please absolve me. So we find lots of similarities or comparison between physics and Buddhism from the very beginning onwards. It is a search for describing the reality, and the description is not merely for the sake of understanding, but in order to have some practical implications and applications. So there is an evolutionary growth. So initially it was an ontological search, and later we find that in both the traditions, it is becoming kind of an epistemological. So instead of the entities, there the consciousness is coming in, how the phenomenon is described by the consciousness, or the measurement is made, and how they are describing the things. So it is a kind of, from physics, it is experiment, and from the Buddhist tradition, it is the experience, a moment of encountering the reality. So initially it was realist, and from both the perspectives, we see that it is an instrumentalist view. And then from the Madhyamaka tradition, we see that, the emptiness as the ultimate reality. And then we see that the reality as constructed. So the matter, energy, are they existing? Are they permanent? And from physics, we see that, the decay of matter, even the hydrogen atom, its decay. And also we see that in relativity theory and classical physics, there is only one interpretation, or there are no manifoldness of interpretation. But as we come across to the quantum mechanics, there are a number of interpretations. So in the same way, the Buddhist tradition, we think that, we see that, there are numerous, it is something like a forest, that, so many schools, and even in the schools, there are also different interpretations. So this is a kind of a general framework. So in the classical physics, we see that, a substantival explanation, or a kind of space and time. So these are entities, or absolute things in which everything is happening. So the space and time, they are absolute, existing, and everything is happening there. The space is infinite, boundless, three-dimensional, but the time, there was a beginning, kind of moving forward, and endless time. So the space and time is perceived as a kind of container, where they are putting things in a kind of a box, and events are placed in the time. So it is a kind of real ontological entity in the classical physics, and especially according to Newton. There also we find the absolute motion and also the simultaneity in the Newtonian, which was later changed. So we find in the classical physics a kind of a configuration of matter, building blocks. There are forces, fields. They are having inherent existence, ontological inherent existence of entities. So that is what the classical physics is describing. So there are unchangeable basic structures. So phenomena as an effect, searching for the cause as scientific enterprise. So a cause-effect structure, and the effect, the cause is preceding the cause. So the epistemology of the classical physics is that if the laws and state of the system are known, we could predict the future. And this future could be predicted with absolute certainty. And then Newton was trying to explain gravity, but though he was quantitatively defined it very well, Einstein later interpreted this as a kind of a spooky action, which he was not really explaining. So then we see the development of conflict with the causal structure versus the field proposed by Maxwell. And there is also the mechanistic worldview. And in this mechanistic worldview, we see that the whole is equivalent to the parts. If we are dissociating the parts, the whole is there. And also, if we are putting together the parts, then we get the whole. So what is the basis is that the Cartesian reductionism, going, dividing, and finding. So it is a kind of a realist, atomistic view. So then when we come across to the theory of relativity, we find instead of the space and time, the space-time. And this space-time is a kind of a quasi-objectivity. Wherever there is matter, there is space-time. And matter is curving the space-time. So only in the presence of matter, we have the space-time. So there is an objectivity. There is a deterministic interpretation, or that is the way the science was perceiving things. And then there is also the objective existence of entities. There is also the observer and the observed dualism. So the observer can detach himself or herself and perceive the experiment. And there is really a differentiation between the observer and the observed. So there is also, we find, a realistic interpretation. So when we come across to the geometry, we also find that, from epistemology, there is a movement to ontology. So in the Euclidean geometry, there is the fifth postulate. That is, there are two lines, and another line is following on it. If the internal angles are 180, then it will be a parallel line. And if it is less than, then it will converge. And if it is more than, it will diverge. So many of the mathematicians really wanted to give a robust explanation or proof for it. In the 17th century, Zachary was trying to give it by another interpretation, that is, given a line and a point outside, how many lines could be drawn? Then from there we see that there are two, the non-Euclidean geometries are evolving. There is the Riemann curved space. So at that time, it was merely an epistemological. So he was saying that it is possible to create no lines. And then there is another one saying that there will be more lines. So the Riemann and the Lobachevskian way of interpretation. So this Riemann space was later taken up by Einstein, and he was explaining that gravity, it is the curvature of the space-time. So we could see that, an epistemological notion is made or given an ontological status. So that is, the space-time is really having an objective value and objective existence. So when we come across to the quantum mechanics, there we find the quantization, that is the quantization of energy, quantization of radiation, quantization of space. There is also the uncertainty, the probability, and the complementarity. So everything coming together to give an interpretation that, it is indeterministic. So in the classical and the relativistic, we find that, it is really deterministic. But when we come across to the quantum mechanical level or microscopic level, it is becoming indeterministic. And then we also find that, the observer and the observed, they are not detached, but there is a unity. So the objectivity of an entity, or the objective detached observation is becoming impossible. So as we have already seen in the morning lecture, the measurements are creating the phenomena. The phenomena is not exactly there, but when we are measuring, it is through the measurements, and depending upon the measurement system, we are getting the reality. So as we have seen there, there is no intrinsic properties of the particles. It is the measurement that is giving the properties. So there is not an ontology, but there is an epistemology. An epistemology in the sense that, we are knowing about the system. It is not about the existence of the real entities of the things, but it is about the knowledge of ours about the system. So what we find in the quantum mechanics is a kind of an anti-realism. It is a kind of an instrumentalism. So it works. So according to Copenhagen interpretation, we don't ask questions. You get the results, and be aware about that. You get the results, and then this is giving the meaning. So they are not caring about the meaning or the entities or the problems about the explanations, but it works. So it is a kind of an instrumentalist view of interpretation. That is what we find in the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. So we have seen what is meant by the collapse of the wave function. So there is the Hilbert space. So it is not a real space, but it is a mathematical space, and there is the infinite possibilities that is given by the Schrodinger equation, which is deterministic. But as we are making the measurement, it is collapsing to one result. So it is a probability, that is what we are getting. So about the collapse of the wave function, also there are different interpretations. One is given by John von Neumann. So that is, the intervention of a conscious observer is responsible for the collapse of the wave function, which could be further explained by the Schrodinger's cat. Then we have the Copenhagen interpretation, which asserts that during a measurement, that knowledge of the observer changes. That is, the knowledge of the observer changes before and after the measurement. Then there is the interpretation given by Roger Penrose that the collapse of the wave function which occurs at the gap junctions between neurons in the brain, and that is the way the consciousness is being brought into to explain the collapse of the wave function. We are not certain about which of these is correct, because these are all three different interpretational views, and I think many of the scientists are not bothered about the way it works. So that is the final explanation given. So what we find in quantum mechanics is that there is a holism, there is an interconnectedness. There is also the experiment, the non-locality, which was also further explained in the morning. So that is the non-separability in space and time. So a particle that is being aware about the other, and it is also dependent on the other. In order to keep the parity, when one particle is changed, the other one is also changed. So it is an interconnectedness. So there is also that is violating the theory of relativity, and instantaneous interactions are possible. So that may be a place where we could think of the proposal given by ECG Sudarshan, that is the transluminal signals. Tim Modlin and other people are saying that it is possible that the light, the velocity of light could be a kind of a medium. We have already known the velocities that are below. We could also find particles which can move faster than that. So one of the examples is given by ECG Sudarshan as tachyons. So if these are all theoretical interpretations which has no experimental validation, has not been done. So the possibilities of quantum teleportation, which we may find it in the sci-fi, that is scientific fiction, and such psychedelic events. Going to the moon today, we will be reaching the moon yesterday. So the possibilities of velocities which can move faster. What ECG Sudarshan would claim that if we have instrumentation, then we will be able to discover the tachyons. So maybe at present this is remaining as a kind of scientific fiction, though mathematically it is viable. Maybe in the future such possibilities are there. So we have also many different interpretations in quantum mechanics. So I just want to bring in the David Bohm, who had given a new interpretation which is known as Bohmian Mechanics, and that is based on the quantum potential. And I think Your Holiness, you had a very close association with David Bohm, and he has taught you physics. So he was one of the great physicists, and he is also known as the founder of the foundation of physics. So he proposed the new interpretation basing on his discovery, that is the Arnav-Bohm effect. So normally the field, that is the magnetic field, will not be visible outside the solenoid. But in the Arnav-Bohm effect, we find that the light rays can be split by the solenoid or the magnetic field inside it. So from there, he develops the quantum potential, and he gave a new interpretation to the quantum mechanics. And he says that the particle and the wave, they are together. It is the quantum potential is a kind of a guiding principle. The particle is guided by the quantum potential. So we find that the potential in the classical physics as a mathematical symbol alone. But in quantum mechanics, he shows that it has a physical validity, or it is possible to show the existence. So what kind of existence it may have? It is a kind of quasi-ontological existence. And also, he has not given very clearly how the relationship between the particle and the wave. And there is also the experimental validation, or the differentiation between Copenhagen interpretation and the David Bohm's interpretation. There is also no experimental clarity, or no experimental evidence. But there are many physicists now being aware about it, and like Goldstein and many others, they have taken up it further. And just recently, I read an article that some of the physicists who have taken it and applied it into the field equations of relativity, and says that there is no Big Bang. But instead of that, they say that if the Bohmian interpretation of quantum mechanics is there is a steady state universe. So it shows that it can be further extended. So this is all only what I. So we find in the Bohmian interpretation there is the wave-particle singularity. So in the Copenhagen interpretation, what we have is a dualistic interpretation, the wave and the particle. But he is going further beyond it and saying that this is a single entity. There are some experimental evidence for it, but the majority of the scientists have not accepted it. There is also what the Bohm would claim, that the order and chaos. So this is part of the same causal chain. And he was trying to give an ontological deterministic interpretation to quantum mechanics. So David Bohm showed that there is a possibility that we could give another interpretation. We should also see that in the 1927, Heisenberg and Max Born, they have made a theorem saying that there is no possibility for another interpretation. And then von Neumann came up with the mathematical theorem, that the impossibility theorem, showing that no other interpretation other than the quantum mechanics given by Copenhagen. But seeing these two, Bohm was capable of showing another interpretation, and there is an impossibility theorem. We see that Bell, the inequality theorem, and showing that one is to be correct, and he found that both are correct. So Bohm's interpretation is non-local. So that further explains about the non-locality and other things. So this is what we find in the quantum mechanics. Ultimately, in quantum mechanics, we see that it is the consciousness is constructing, or during the measurement, the phenomena is created there. Don't ask further about that. So it is a kind of consciousness creating or constructing the reality. So that is what we find in quantum mechanics given by the Copenhagen, and there are alternative interpretations. So I am now entering into the Buddhist interpretations, and I am only an amateur. And if anything goes wrong, I think that Your Holiness should intervene. So this is what I have learned. The Buddhist scholars, from the very beginning, they have thought about what is the reality. So in the Abhidharma, we find that the systematic teaching of Buddha. So that is a theory, and there are many interpretations possible, and even these interpretations, there are also many commentaries. So there are more than, I may not be correct, 18 schools and various interpretations. There are also psychological, they are more psychological explanations than physical explanations. And the Sarvastivadins, so that is one of the first school. So they speak about dharma as a fundamental stuff, a kind of a building block, and not eternally existing entities. And according to them, the only nirvana has eternality and truth. So these dharmas are having identifying marks. They are recognizable and they are distinguishable from others. They are also possessing unchanging essence known as Sofava. And there are how many, depending upon the schools, 75 according to Sarvastivadins, 82 according to Theravada. And the school contends that dharmas exist in everywhere, and there are also the three temporal dimensions, past, present, and future. So I am not speaking about many the schools, but only I have just selected a few. Then the main school, that is the Madhyamaka by Nagarjuna. So the conceptualization between the absolute existence and the denial of existence, and that is also based on Abhidharma. So there were also an earlier distinction between the primary and the secondary. The primary existence has objective reducible entities, and the secondary we have entities are reducible to the primary, so they won't be having an existence. Swabhava, ontological basic stuff on which everything else is built upon. So the Madhyamika, the school according to Nagarjuna says that, there is no basic stuff like Swabhava. So he's basing it on Shunyata and Swabhava, emptiness and the essence. Paramartha Satya and Vyavaharika Satya, that is the two kind of realities or truths, the ultimate and the conventional. The ultimate reality and the conventional reality, the emptiness as the essence. Things empty of Swabhava, essence, they don't have an intrinsic independent existence. Their existence are always on dependent. And the conventional existence of the phenomena. So the phenomenal or the conventional existence are conditional, transitory. It is not a denial of reality, but denial of substantialist theories of reality. So that is what we find there. So we find an interconnectedness, praditya samutpada, dependent origination. Phenomena exist only conventionally. So there is no real existence. It is only a conventional. And even dharmas also exist as dependent. Hence they are empty. The conditions for conventional existence, they are the interdependence, and therefore they are impermanent. Emptiness, that itself is not intrinsic and not independent. So therefore the doctrine of emptiness itself an emptiness. So the entities are conventionally real. They are kind of an appearance. So the ultimate truth, all existence are conventional, devoid of essence, emptiness of emptiness. Then there is one of the schools, that is the Yogacara. There are the three natures of the Yogacara perspective: the fabricated nature, the dependent nature, and the perfected nature. All dharmas are only conceptual fabrications. So evident here is the crucial Yogacara concept of duality. The fabricated is said to appear as a dual self, whereas reality is non-dual. Since, as we have seen above, Vasubandhu believes in the selflessness of all dharmas, the dual self is the false appearance of a self that is attributed to any entity. Things and selves mistakenly appear as dual. So the necessity to go beyond the dualistic interpretation. So Vasubandhu's interpretation of conceptual duality and the perceptual duality. So again, he emphasizes the necessity to go beyond the dual. So in the Yogacara view, we find that everything is an appearance. It is a kind of a construct. So that is what I think Geshe Sengye in the last explanation he was explaining that Chittamatra, the consciousness is constructing the reality. So the Chittamatra or Vijñapti Matra, the mind only, that is the cognition only. So we have listened to him saying that it is the mind that is constructing the reality. So there is a subject-object duality. So that is also a form of ignorance. So when mind is seen as it truly is undistorted by that duality, one experiences the perfect nature, the causal flow of mind empty of subject-object duality. So this subject-object, all kinds of these dualistic perceptions are of ignorance. And then the mind is constructing the reality. So I just go on saying that, even there also different interpretations are there. The Chandrakirti's refuted Yogacara, and then Tsongkhapa is again taking it up, that view, and using it for further explanation, and even going to an ontological interpretation. So what I sum up, I think, is that, in the classical physics and relativity, we find the reality as objective. It is observer independent. There is a certainty, and there is an ontology. In quantum mechanics, we find an epistemological. We know about the state of the system, not about its ontological existence. There is the consciousness creating the reality. So there is also going beyond the observed dualistic concepts. So we can find a kind of this ontological, epistemological evolution, both in physics as well as in Buddhism. And also we find that, there is a quest for transcending the dualistic views. Atom, proton, neutron, particle, quarks, prion, rishons, and there is an endless atomization of fundamental particles. So we could ask the question, is there any end for mere constructions, or are they mere constructions of the mind? So at present, the last theory is speaking about the quarks as the fundamental particles, and then we have the Higgs bosons giving the mass. And there are some scientists who are proposing that, quarks are made up of prions, and some others are saying that, they are made up of rishons. So it goes on further. So are we constructing or fabricating machines in order to find our own theoretical entities we are proposing, or are they real, or are they constructions of the mind? So that is whether our consciousness are constructing the reality. There is also the principle of causality as a fundamental explanation in both. And there are also many schools of thought, interpretations in schools. But unlike in quantum mechanics, in Buddhism, especially in Madhyamaka, we find that, there is no closure of arguments. There is no ultimate, somebody is authorized and saying that, this is the last explanation and nobody should going beyond it. So an endless debate possible in Madhyamaka Buddhism, but quantum mechanics negates such debates by making impossibility theorems. So there is also in both, we find a search for interconnectedness and holism. There is also the meteorological relations that, the holographic paradigm interrelatedness and the description of the reality for, so both the physics and the Buddhism, the descriptions or the theories are actually for a further technological applications. In quantum mechanics, we have the applications, and in Madhyamaka Buddhism, we find that, the spiritual pursuit, it is for meditation and generating compassion. Quantum mechanics, it is for a technology, and Madhyamaka, we find that a spiritual pursuit, and also we find that, in both there is a kind of a realist and an instrumentalist view. So I think this is what I thought of proposing, and maybe we shall have the discussion and dialogue. So thank you, Your Holiness. Thank you. You want to, Your Holiness, want to add something to these different interpretations of Buddhism, and which?
I usually use this time. First time dialogue. So the organizer, used the word dialogue between science and Buddhism, and I made correction. Not Buddhism, but some Buddhist science and modern science. So if we also some kind of dialogue, Buddhism and science, then we have to talk next life. We never discuss about next life, isn't it? Almost. Oh, like that. So I think more precisely, Buddhist science and modern science. And then to some extent, some Buddhist philosophical views. We never discuss about the Four Noble Truths. Simply, what is the reality? There are different views within Buddhism, Buddhist theory. So this is quite interesting to discuss, like that. So then some of your presentation, I don't know. So you know better.
I would first like to ask the organizers, we are running quite behind time according to the schedule. The first presentation should have ended at 14:15, and we are already at 14:32. So how much time should we keep for the discussion? We began a little late, I think. Up to? Oh, that's a lot. Okay, great. Thanks. So, Matthew, you covered a lot of ground.
Yes,
huh?
I know.
So
too much, maybe.
So as a practicing physicist, I could pick up some points, and maybe I will mention them before throwing the discussion open. And perhaps I would, one historical comment first, that the people who first proposed quantum mechanics to explain the facts of atomic physics were actually rather modest to start with. They expected it was a provisional theory which might break down when you went to the scale of even nuclei, and it was a big surprise when it worked very well in the atomic nucleus, and now it has gone to much smaller scales. And regarding interpretation, again, this theory of measurement, which you heard about, the three versions of collapse, I don't think any of the people who proposed it thought of it as ultimate solution. I think because they did not think of quantum mechanics as the final theory. However, so many years after that, there is no sign of quantum mechanics breaking down, even as it is pushed to smaller and smaller scales. And therefore, the issue of foundations becomes very serious. So I would like to add to the three versions of collapse which you mentioned, a fourth, which is that collapse itself collapses, right? That you try to give a version of quantum mechanics. The artificiality of collapse, which many people have pointed out, is that it brings in a conscious observer, perhaps a human, and this is, in the light of biology, this is simply unacceptable, and also in the light of the fact that you start with simple forms of life, and one can understand a lot about them by applying the rules of quantum mechanics, and then where do you draw the line? Now, some courageous people like Roger Penrose have drawn a line, right? But there are others who perhaps would not want to draw a line, and at least see how far can we push quantum mechanics without making this artificial distinction that some events like collapse happen. Okay, so I would like to mention a couple of things you didn't mention. Of course, they come with their own difficulties. Something called a relative state interpretation of quantum mechanics. So it's not that these measurement events are anything separate from the evolution of the world. They're happening all the time. The observer is not privileged. But there is this element of interdependence and correlation, or the technical word is entanglement. So if the system does this, the observer does that. But that doesn't really prove that the observer actually did that, because the system might do something else, and then the observer might do something else. Now, this was proposed by a young man called Everett. It became a little notorious because his thesis advisor, John Wheeler, called it the many worlds interpretation. Okay? But I'd like to go back to Everett's original concept, which was the relative state interpretation. That is, and I think that ties up with some of the things that we have been hearing of interdependence and not independent reality of anything collapsing, either the electron or the apparatus. So that's one point I wanted to make for the sake of discussion. The second point I wanted to make is that quantum mechanics has also been pushed into cosmology. Okay, it's not that you have a separate macroscopic world of galaxies and so on. Today, the best theory that we have of the formation of galaxies actually involves quantum processes which occur very close to this so-called Big Bang. So I just like to say that, at least according to some 21st century perspective, one would try to see if one can get by with quantum mechanics without adding other ingredients to it. And the price you pay for that is that all the uncertainty that you were so comfortable with about electrons extends to some extent to all of us. I mean, it never stops. There is no line to be drawn. So if you deny the reality of certain properties, of objective properties of the electron, you do have to take it to a small extent. Then, of course, you are left with explaining our illusion of this classical world. And the phrase, I don't know if it's more than a phrase which is used, is emergence. And emergence is an idea which exists even outside quantum physics. Certain properties of systems emerge as, and I again find a connection between something I heard in your lecture and other lectures, which is conventional reality. So it's a nice convention that we are all gathered here in the convention center and having a conference, right? And so I think quantum mechanics does allow, again, there is a technical aspect to it called consistent histories, which I will not go into. So purely, even if one knew nothing about Madhyamaka philosophy, but just tried to push quantum mechanics to its limit without bringing in collapse, you would be led to this notion that there is an emergent reality, but not an absolute reality by any means. And everything is described by this relative state kind of interpretation. So I just offer this to you as a point of possible discussion. And I will look out in the audience for questions to the speaker and more broadly on the subject.
I've read about all the dialogues that His Holiness has been holding in Shimla, Dharamsala. I've not attended any of them, but I've witnessed one or two. You know, I just have a fundamental question that all the speakers, when they speak of quantum mechanics, they start with Newton and the physical reality at the macro level, and then you come down to the micro level. I think another dimension, which he is the first person to have touched upon it, which will have now to be brought in, and that is astrophysics. Because it is going to, you can call it later on when we ask questions, it is metaphysics. No, philosophy and all this does go into metaphysics. You can't just avoid it. And my question is that once you go into astrophysics now, you see that there's an end state. Either the universe is now going to expand forever, infinite expansion at infinite speeds, or there's a contraction bank to this thing. You read the Hawking's book. So if we bring in astrophysics dimension into it in future, how is going to impact this philosophy and quantum mechanics?
Wonderful question. There are lots of metaphysical elements into it, stretched out philosophical views. I must say that when we are bringing in the concept of astrophysics into this discussion, I think it is the astrophysics that initiated the whole process. The whole process of thought. We have started with the cosmogonies. And I think that we end up with cosmogonies. So what we have already heard, and I did not present there, we have the Big Bang. And then there is another theory which is proposed that, the big bounce. Big bounce is that, just what we have already spoken about, there is the beginning and then the end. And that is, there is again another end. So a big bounce theory is proposed by another physicist. There is also the Harvard professor Linda Randall. She was speaking about the multiple universes in her book Wrapped Space. So saying that, particles can move from one universe to the other. You might have also heard about Hawking speaking about the wormhole. And after 2 years before he was ago, he was saying that, they are not existing. So the speculative amount is really, we cannot put a limit to it. Definitely, there I feel that, are we finding the constructions of our own mind, fabricating instruments to discover it, or things are there really existing? So the multiple universes now, it is simply a theory, but maybe after some years, who knows that we may find it. And I am sure that we have an astrophysicist here, the director of UCA. Maybe he could explain further.
The question is how it's going to impact what you are saying.
So that's what I said, that, what I felt is that it is an endless process, an asymptotic process. So we will never end.
Could I add one remark? I think one is forced to apply quantum mechanics to everything because things interact with each other and you can't have one quantum and the other not. So in particular, this notion you heard that matter causes curvature of space. But if matter is subject to quantum laws, so is space. So one of the casualties of modern physics is space-time. People are working on quantum versions of space-time, and it's very much a project. Yes, next question from here. Have you got the mic? Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on in some sense, the last things you were talking about, where you were asking, are we, in some sense, creating particles from our theories? That our theories are sending us to look for certain fundamental particles. Let me give an example. If you try to draw a circle, you know that it's only an approximation. If you try to fabricate a sphere, you know that it's only an approximation. It's not a perfect sphere. It's not a perfect circle. So everything that exists is unique in a certain way. It's imperfect. But in our theories, especially in quantum theory, we create in our theories indistinguishable particles. Every electron has exactly the same charge as the next electron. It has exactly the same mass as the next electron. It has exactly the same spin as the next electron. These intrinsic properties are perfect and perfectly the same. So you have an imperfect world created from a perfect substrate, and we have evidence of its perfection by things like the exchange interaction, covalent bonding, that you need to have this exchange be unnoticeable between two electrons. So we have an imperfect world. We create a theory of, in some sense, almost like Platonic forms. These are perfect entities. And then we go back into the lab and we look for them. We look for the perfect entities, the perfect photon, the single photon in a single mode of a radiation field, a single electron, a single atom. So you start with imperfection, you imagine the possibility of perfection, you develop a theory, then you go back into the experimental laboratory and you begin looking for them again. I find this relationship between the imperfect and the perfect really stunning, that our world is a world of everything is different, everything is unique. No two things are alike. But the world of electrons, they're all alike. The world of photons, they're all alike. And so there may be something to this idea that you're talking about of we go back then into the laboratory and we seek out what nature in some sense never provides. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I understood. I think that is the whole goal of the scientific search. So
The search for perfection,
maybe understanding.
perfect understanding.
Yes, trying to understand what the reality it is, and then as we entering into more and more deeper domains, there we find new particles or entities. Maybe at that time they are theoretical entities, just like Higgs boson in '64 they proposed, and it's only in just 2 years ago they have discovered. So the theoretical entities, later discoveries. So this process of understanding the reality in both theoretical and experimental level will be going on, and maybe then we will come across that the microscopic they are more perfect. Maybe they are little extended. So the imperfections may not be the space for them. So then the macroscopic only we have the more of the
electron
imperfections.
The electron is meant to be a point particle, has no extension.
Yeah, first here, and then.
Thank you very much. I just had two queries. Number one, question related to measurement. When you have direct perception of reality, what kind of measurement is happening? Number two, at the ontological and epistemological level, can order and chaos coexist?
I will start with the second question. It depends how you perceive. So order can be considered as just opposite to that of chaos. So that perspective will make you to think that they are opposites. So that is one perspective. The other one is that the physicist David Bohm, he was considering order and chaos. There is one chain. And order is in one end and chaos is the other end. So I think that it all depends on how you perceive. And that is what exactly I was speaking about, this even in the Madhyamaka Buddhism, how different theories, schools, interpretations, commentaries, they speak about the same things, Swabhava. And then they go on interpreting it in numerous ways. I would claim that, the infinite possibility of our own perceptions, the infinite capacity for imagination, the creativity. So I think that will, the manifoldness. So we can have different perspectives. And then the measurement. When it comes to the macroscopic, we can directly perceive. But when it comes to the microscopic, it is through the instruments we interpret. So that interpretations can also happen according to what you see there. It's in the cloud chamber, a curve. So you to interpret in one way or the other, maybe one particle. So there comes in the consciousness. So in the microscopic level of measurements, we do not know exactly what is happening. It happens. Yeah, that is why Bohm and Einstein, Schrödinger, Planck, they were all claiming that this is not giving any meaning, incompleteness of quantum mechanics. So that is the reason why they were all arguing against quantum mechanics. But they could not come and give a cohesive another interpretation. And we also see that quantum mechanics gives real practical applications. Nobody has shown that this is wrong. Every experiment is showing that this is valid.
Okay, the question over there.
You were mentioning that consciousness was brought into quantum mechanics by von Neumann, but it was publicized much more by Wigner in 1967. But Wigner later on, 10 or 15 years later, withdrew the whole suggestion, saying that the presence of the cosmic microwave background radiation will decohere the whole state, and so there is no question of the collapse continuing right up to consciousness. But unfortunately, I never heard much discussion of the second suggestion of Wigner, probably because John Bell suggested that this is a kind of argument which is for all practical purposes, but in principle, the problem is not solved or something like that. Have you any idea what is the status of the decoherence idea due to cosmic microwave background radiation?
Sir, I don't know much about, I know that the Wigner is the one who popularized it, though it was initiated by von Neumann. I don't know much. Maybe someone could further explain.
But again, one is treating the cosmic microwave background as an external agent. See, you can always get decoherence is basically a process of sweeping things under the rug, of pushing it off somewhere else. And since this microwave background radiation is everywhere, it's a very convenient. But I think if you're a man of principle like John Bell, I would still go along. Or if you're a quantum cosmologist, then CMBR is part of the whole system. So, that would be my reaction based on what I have read.
단다 제된 인코리 비가 논 시오데 아니 가르세 그래 다 쇼로지 치 돈트라서 와차 상데 고 요롱지 진근이 저거요
The question is, the things doesn't exist objectively, independently. We in Buddhism say, what appears to your mind is not there outside there. What is there outside doesn't appear to our mind. So let's take the example of the smallest particle like atom. How about if I ask the question, what happens when an atom is initially initially comes into existence? What happens? What is its character and nature? He's regarding the question according to science, when the world first formed, the universe was formed. There was a rainfall for thousands of years, and which led to the creation of water. And regarding, so his question is that, and regarding the formation of the universe, why it is expanding all the time is because space is expanding all the time. Just like blowing into an, what do you call that, balloon. As you blow more and more.
Yes, he was translating it to me and was telling that it is a very deep question, and he himself find it difficult to explain. Thank you, Geshe-la, for this wonderful question. That it came out of your what I have grabbed from what he translated to me. He said that the intrinsic properties of the particles. Is that? Yeah, the beginning. So normally we don't experience the subatomic particles unless we measure it or some kind of interactions. So the properties of those particles exist only when we are measuring. So in our ordinary experience, it may not be there. Only in the context of an experiment, we come to really experience it. So maybe we don't need to express it in a very general way. So when an experiment is conducted, then the particle or the microscopic entities are evolving. Then we need to explain and its characteristics, its properties is to be explained. So otherwise, a general explanation about them is not necessary. Is that what I understand from the translation? Maybe I think it is better that in a very closed context, we may be able to further explain and discuss. So that would be a point where we can give further explanations.
I think we've reached the 3 o'clock end of this session. So thanks to everyone.
So thank you. Thank you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nityananda and Professor Chandrakunal, for the fascinating session. Now I would like to invite all of you to join us for tea. The tea break will be for 20 minutes, so we have to be back here by 3:20. So thank you. Please join us for tea. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Request everyone to settle down. Welcome back again. Now, going to the next session, I would humbly request the speaker for this session, the Venerable Yangtang Tuku Kishi Lobsang Tempe Gyatsen La, from the private office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who will be speaking on what is the Buddhist perspective of the world and its beings. And the chair for this session, Venerable Kishi Lhagdor La, the director of the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, Dharamshala, to kindly come up on the stage. And I humbly request Kishi Lhagdor La to initiate the session. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back to the auditorium. We'll start the last session. The last session we have today is the presentation by Venerable Geshe Lobsang Tembe Gyaltsen, also known as Yangtang Rinpoche, and he will speak on what is Buddhist perspective on the world and its beings. To give you a just brief introduction about Rinpoche, Rinpoche studied in the Serame Monastic University and completed his PhD, Geshe Larampa, and presently serving in His Holiness the Dalai Lama's office. He is supervising the wonderful project of compiling the compendium of Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy, and he is also the editor and the main supervisor of compiling the collected works of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in this booklet, there is only actually 2 lines about him. So when I met him this morning saying, how come that you have such a small introduction? Then he told me that you can put more. And I said, what should I put? He said, you should say that I'm born from my parents. So I think this is a really good introduction, because I mean, it looks like making joke, but to be a real human being is very difficult. So Rinpoche is saying he's a real human being at the core. So from that perspective, the presentation I'm sure will be very, very interesting. And just to give a brief background, although like many of my Buddhist scholars and colleagues will be explaining, as is explained in Chandakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara, Entering the Middle Way, that it is the mind alone which has made up this whole universe, and the multifarious conventional realities that we see in this world are a creation of the mind, and the karma or action which is the product of that mind. And then when it comes to explaining the details of the different structures of the universe, we talk about different levels of phenomena, which Rinpoche is going to touch. There is a level of phenomena which is directly perceivable, which is called the obvious phenomena. A second category, which cannot be directly perceived, but which can be found out through inferential cognition. And there is a third level of phenomena, which you cannot directly perceive, and you cannot also find out directly through inferential cognition. But still you can find that out by relying on scriptural sources taught by enlightened beings. Now that sounds a little bit blind faith, but the idea is that those enlightened beings, they have developed special extrasensorial powers or mental powers by which they have developed this laser-sharp wisdom and intelligence which can penetrate and understand the nature of reality, the subtlest nature of reality, which probably the most powerful instrument that we have today in the world may not be able to understand. That is probably a very interesting point that we need to note down. And some of the Western Buddhist scholars have also, when they made the presentation of Buddhism, they talk about at least 2 levels. One level, there is a Buddhist explanation and you relate it, and you can also feel, oh, this is what I used to think. You can easily relate it to your experience. But then you go into a next level, which you really, then you start wondering how they are able to present this. And I'm not getting any idea, no clue about this, what they are saying, you see. So how these people are able to make this presentation? And those presentations are so subtle and so systematic. And as far as possible, you analyze it, you try to fathom it, but you're not able to find any contradiction in it. So that clearly shows that these are kind of guide maps written down by people who have really made that spiritual journey into the subtlest nature of the reality. So that is a very interesting thing. So therefore, like on the one hand, we try to find the subtlest level of reality through using the most sophisticated scientific technology. On the other hand, we should not and cannot afford to ignore the capacity of the human brain, or the human mind. Using this human laboratory, if you do this contemplative practice, systematic enough and hard enough, then at least the Buddhist text is explained about the possibilities of going into the very subtle level of these things. For example, when you read all these subtle explanations that is there, they're all done through not only just thought experiment, but through their personal experiences. So therefore, it's very important to pay attention to this, and Rinpoche is going to explain this in detail. So Rinpoche, as a true human being, I am sure you will give a very wonderful explanation of the Buddhist concept of the formation of the world and the sentient beings within it. So, thank you.
So it cannot be possible if it were just attributed to the natural world's processes of the nature. Because if there is no difference in the cause, then there cannot be difference in the effect as well. So from the point of view of causality in Buddhism, the formation of the world that we live in, for example, and the beings living in it have this relationship of the support and the supported. The support referring to the universe, the world, and the supported referring to the beings. So there is this connection between the two. All religions consider liberation or salvation according to their own systems as their primary goal. Their teachings are mainly concerned about cultivating happiness and avoiding suffering. So compared to that, it is obvious that they do not deal with the external world in great detail. Apart from Buddhism, all other religious traditions believe that the external world and the living beings in it are created either by God or some inert or unclear static cause or the four permanent elemental particles. And then, although they may not be religious tradition, but some philosophical systems of India, ancient India, have even asserted that the entire external environment and the internal world of living beings arose by chance, without any cause. And all the Buddhist presentations are based on how things are in nature and dependent origination. In general, the object which is analyzed, and then the reason or logic with which it is analyzed, and the person who analyzes it. And with regard to the object that is examined, it is categorized into three: the obvious objects or manifest objects, and then there's the things which need to be inferred through reason, slightly hidden, and then things which cannot be inferred through any logic or reasoning, but must be concluded based on testimony of an experienced third person whose speech or words fulfills three or four criteria. And when we do analysis or examination to things, we must be unbiased, without any agenda right from the beginning. Because one needs to be someone who is actually looking for the reality or the truth as it is in the object. So what we are trying to do is to establish what the reality or truth is. In other words, how things really are. And so in Buddhism, there is the presentation of the basis, the path, and the result. And even with regard to reasoning, one must not just stay at the level of inference alone, but must corroborate the teachings with one's own experience, direct experience. So I think that in Buddhism we can explain, so with regard to the nature of things, we can talk about the nature of physical things and also the nature of consciousness. So all with respect to all the philosophical tenets or systems of Buddhism, they all propound or form a consciousness and non-associated compounded things. And the compounded things are subsumed under two categories, form and consciousness. But Chittamatras talk about the form as being reflection of our mind. So in our own experience, we can see how the appearance of things and our perception of things are incompatible. There is a gap between the two. And there are different appearances of things, such as appearance of permanence of things, and then the things also appear, but then they do not exist the way they appear to us. So for the Chittamatras, things do appear to be external to our consciousness, to ourselves, but they do not have any external existence, but they are in the entity or the nature of the mind or the consciousness itself. So let's take the example of a flower, the flower as a flower, and the flower as a form or physical object and an attractive object. So if the flower were to be attractive by way of conglomeration of particles from its own side externally, then that attractiveness of the flower must present itself to the consciousness, and therefore it must be attractive to anyone who looks at it or who sees it. But that's not the case. So the attractiveness of the flower is also a reflection of our consciousness. And therefore, the Chittamatras say that the attractiveness is not in the flower as externally existing, presenting itself. So if it were just a conglomeration of the particles presenting itself as attractive, then, for example, the flower as a form is physical object for us, whereas for those who are absorbed, for meditators in the concentration realm, who are absorbed in total concentration of the formless realms, called the infinite space, when a meditator of that realm looks at the flower, there is only space, and therefore this flower's form or physicality does not have any external existence, but it's a reflection of our consciousness. This is what Asanga says in his Tegdu or Mahayana Samuchaya. So I want to have the time to go into detail. So within the forms, there are the forms which are dependent, and there is the form which is called so there are different kinds of forms. What could be present to the visual perception and unobstructed, and secondly, what is unpresentable and unobstructed, and what is presentable but unobstructed. And then there, within the unpresentable, unobstructed form, or the dharma source form, which is only those forms which are objects of mental consciousness. And then with regard to the nature of, so there are 5 such forms, such as utterly imputed forms and so forth. So forms seen in dreams, for example, are dharma source forms. And regarding the nature of consciousness, the nature of consciousness is such that it's mere experience, awareness, and mere luminosity. Apart from this, there's no way we can define consciousness. So based on the empowering faculty, it is divided into sensory and mental consciousness. Based on the appearance of the generic image of its object and not, it is divided into the conceptual and non-conceptual consciousness. And then we can also divide the consciousness into coarse and subtle. And the coarse consciousness is comprised of the 5 sensory perceptions. And then the subtle consciousness, the presentation of the subtle, there's a subtle consciousness includes the mind and the 4 empty states. And the presentation of consciousness is found most extensively in Buddhist literature, wherein more than analyzing the object is endeavored to strengthen the subjective mind, and by doing so, to focus on seeing reality of the object. So in Buddhism, the presentation or explanation of consciousness is in great detail. The greatest detailed explanation is found in Buddhism. So the consciousness or mind has a natural tendency or the ability to see or be aware of objects. And then the next question, question number 2, how did the universe and its... So that was about the nature of the universe and the beings. And how did the universe and its beings come into being is the next question that I would like to touch on. And so within the universe, the external world, we can talk about the 4 phases of evolution, then abidance, and then the destruction. I mean, 3 phases. And then at the end, so when the world is formed, we go through these 3 processes or phases, and at the end, again, from this space, empty space, or realm of space, things evolve. And therefore, with regards to the space from which it is said everything evolves in the beginning and everything at the end then dissolves into it. What kind of space is referred to here? So the space from which everything arises and into which everything dissolves could be understood in terms of the space particle mentioned in the Kala Chakra Tantra. So the space here refers to this. And all the coarse things dissolve finally into it. This space particle, and the space particle is the source of everything arising, and the physicality of things arising from it. So why is it termed as a mere potential? In the stainless commentary, stainless light commentary of Galachakra Tantra, it is mentioned that everything comes from this space particle. So in the Kala Chakra Tantra, as it is said that, whereas the subtlest particle that is clearly described as a dharma source form, an involved element, and unobstructed form in Abhidhamma Kosha and its commentaries, as well as Abhisamuchaya. For so therefore, if it is an evolved element, as it is called, it must have arisen from its source. And if that element is taken to be an amassed element, which serves as the source of the extremely subtle particles, it cannot be anything else but the extremely subtle particle per se. Therefore, the source must be subtler than that, and it cannot be established as anything other than something which is potential in nature. Usually, the extremely subtle particle and the four elements are termed as elements on account of whichever component element has the most dominant function in a given particle. In reality, they are evolved elements. And so I thought that we could reconcile what is meant by the space particle and then the subtle element in this way. And so the subtle particle, is that the subtlest particle has to be understood in terms of the Kala Chakra space particle from which everything arises, the external world. And therefore, since that is the source from which the external universe arises and to which everything dissolves, it also has no beginning and no end. And it is said that the universe is limitless. And then with regard to the shape of the different world systems, there are worlds which are square or round and so forth in shape. So regarding the shape of this world, this earth, in the Avatamsaka Sutra, it is mentioned that this world is rather round in shape. So in the sutra itself, in this the 13th ram of the Buddhas, which is called the Mijé Jikten, referring to this earth, is round in shape. So the mention of Mijé Jikden Kam, or fearless world, is a reference to this particular earth. So it's not another world system. So as it is said in Abhidhamma Kosha, this is actually corroborates with what is said in Abhidhamma Kosha as the 13th ram of the Buddhas and the Mijé Jikden, or the universe called Mijé, which means fearless. And so that is mentioned in the volume Ta of the Sutra, Avatamsaka. And then with regard to the beings living in it, how did the beings evolve? So, in the external world, at the point corresponding to the point when the wind element dissolves into the space, at that point, within the beings living in it, and so this consciousness dissolves into the space element, which refers to the four empty states. And empty, great empty, and so forth. So the subtlest mind of all, the innermost subtle mind, is the luminous mind. So within a being who has consciousness, the elements dissolve finally into this subtlest mind of clear light or luminosity, and the energy that that is with it. So this is about how the world and the universe, external universe, and the beings evolved. What would happen to the and the question is what becomes of the universe and the beings in it. So whether external, we talk about the external world or any physical object, the subtlest element is the space particle, as I said earlier, which is the source of all the rest of the elements and the external universe, and therefore there is no beginning or end. So if you posit a beginning or an end to this fundamental particle, or called the space particle, or the particle which is the source of all the physical things and the universe, then you would have to say that, that itself comes from without any cause. So this is not logical. And so this space, or the subtlest particle, always abides as the source of the external world and the elements that the external world is made up of. So this is the Buddhist presentation according to the Buddhist treatises. And then naturally, if something exists, it must have its own identity, and there is nothing which does not hold its own identity, and there is nothing which abandons its own identity as such. And this is similar to same with the consciousness as well. And so consciousness, being mere luminosity, mere awareness and mere experience, stays as it is. And there is no unfavorable conditions or an opposing factor which puts an end to this nature of the mind. And so there is this reason that it holds its own nature, and therefore, also because there is no opposing factor which puts an end, or which makes that nature of the mind, being awareness and luminous and experience. Therefore, it continues. That nature of the mind, being mere awareness and experience, continues. So there's no end to that at all. And so whether we are talking about the physical objects or consciousness, I mean, they have that ability to retain its own nature. So we're now talking about why should the design of the universe be like what we see. So with regard to the universe or the external world, why there is the different forms. So when a universe is about to form, at the phase of formation, it is formed because of the beings whose karma is such that they are going to be born into that universe or that world system. Then the universe is formed. So it's not just the particles and the different elements coming together and forming the universe, but together with that, those causes, there's also the karmic dimension to that formation of the universe as well. So if that is not the case, if we have to define or explain only in terms of the evolution of the physicality of the things, just by, called as it happens in the external world in nature, then what is wrong with that? We would have to say that although there is the same kind of a natural process, there are different different aspects or different formations. So it cannot be possible if it were just attributed to the natural world processes of the nature. Because if there is no difference in the cause, then there cannot be difference in the effect as well. So from the point of view of causality in Buddhism, the formation of the world that we live in, for example, and the beings living in it have this relationship of the support and the supported. The support referring to the universe, the world, and the supported referring to the beings. So there is this connection between the two.
So as you have already heard, Rinpoche spoke beautifully the Buddhist concept of a beginningless and endless universe. But then he also spoke this very important dimension of a natural process that's taking place. And that natural process, when came into contact with human actions, then again you will see a different expression of the nature. So this is, I think, a very important point. On the one hand, there is this natural law which is functioning, which also is the meaning of this Sanskrit word dharma, which basically refers to law of nature. So there is this process of functioning of law of nature. But if it is only law of nature which dominates and controls everything, then we sentient beings or human beings are helpless victims. There will be nothing that we can do. But contrarily, the Buddhist teaching says, yes, there is a law of nature, but if you know how to live in harmony with the law of nature, based on your action and activities, then you can have a harmonious, happy and peaceful life. So I think that is a very important concept. And so at this point, I will invite questions. But please remember, when I was in school, I was discipline in charge. Okay, so when you ask question, you will be allowed to ask only one question, and that also not explanatory, but a short question. And I'm making it sure that I will stop at 4:30, whatever happens, hell or storm or whatever. I'll stop at 4:30, okay? So please, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Hopkins, yeah.
for the lovely summary. And I just have a simple question. In the Pali Suttas, there's the Aganya Sutta, the sutra of the beginning in the Digha Nikaya, where they give Buddha gives a description of the evolution of the cosmos and then how it happens and about kingship and so forth. Beings descend from the second level. Is there anything like that amongst the Tibetan translations of the Sanskrit sutras? Is there a beginning sutra like that, or is it just Abhidharma, your sources? That's my question. Very short. Okay. You know the Aganya Sutta?
Yes.
In Pali? So is there anything equivalent in Tibetan translation? I think they didn't translate the Pali things much.
In the Mahayana text or scripture, I have not seen that. But in Abhidhamma the third chapter, when it defines or explains the universe or cosmos, external world, when the world was forming, it is said that one of the deities from the higher plane of existence fell into this earth, and then the beings in this world started. Whereas in the Mahayana text, I have not seen any other reference. So I have not. I don't know about this in the Mahayana scriptures.
Arthur.
Thank you very much. You spoke about the collective karma of the beings who are going to take up life within a particular world system. And I'm wondering whether there might be, this is a strange question, there might be effects on what you might call the natural scientific laws that obtain in a universe. In other words, for example, we have something called the anthropic principle, which says that the laws of the universe have to be very fine-tuned in order for human life to exist. And if they were tuned a little bit differently, then there would be no life on that world system. So there's an adjustment, if you will, of the parameters of the lawful universe to allow for human life. Could it be that it needs to be similarly moral dimensions, say the karmic dimensions, require certain kinds of physical laws with a fine-tuning to allow for example, free will or to allow for learning, moral instruction, that's possible at all, might have certain kinds of physical repercussions, necessities. Do you understand what I'm saying? You understand? Yeah, okay.
The natural law, you're talking about natural law, in the 9th chapter of Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avatara, Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, as usually His Holiness quotes, our pain and pleasure is related to our karma, positive and negative karmas. But generally speaking, the law of causality itself, with regards to lotus, it is said that the color and smell and so forth of a lotus flower, it comes from its own cause. So there's no role of karma in it. But when something becomes a basis for a living being, a sentient being to live in it, or when it's related to a sentient being, and with regards to how something is a beautiful world or good or bad world system is because of the bad and good karmas created by compassion, love, and so forth. So when we talk about something is related to karma, then all the beings, if the karma of the collective karma of the beings being born in that is strong, then accordingly the world system, if it's a product of a collective karma which is positive, the world also would be something pleasant and good.
I was curious if you could say more about causes. In science and in physics, we talk about four fundamental forces. You might think of those as things that make things happen, cause effects. Are there different causes in Buddhist traditions? Can you say more about causes? Is it just because you have an effect, therefore you have a cause? You can't have an effect without a cause? Are there sort of different types of causes? I was just curious if you could say more about that.
So when we talk about law of causality, generally speaking, of course, whatever is compounded phenomena, the things that we see around us, it's a natural law that they come from the causes. So with regard to the causes, what are the different, within the causes, what are the different types of causes? When we explain things in connection with karma, we use the terms like ripened effects and so mainly when we talk about causes, perhaps we could understand it to refer to the substantial cause or the primary material of from which things arise, and then there are cooperative conditions. And because when we create karma, there are different ways in which the karma causes its effect. So because of the difference in the causes, some causes giving rise to ripened karmas, ripened effect, some causes giving rise to the different environments and so forth. So within the causes, I didn't get the question very, very well, but so within causes, we can talk about direct, indirect cause, and so forth. But basically, there are 6. And then there's a direct cause, indirect cause, and then the substantial cause and cooperative conditions. So Rinpoche's the topic is about how the universe is formed and its beings also. In our tradition, Burn tradition, first the subtlest particles are formed, and then the iron particle and so forth are formed. So with regard to the subtlest particle, if you take the size of it, it's a certain part of some part of Bali. So there is mention of light forming, and from there some wheel, and then wind energy, wind forming. And when the wind becomes more and more gross and stronger, then heat is formed, and from heat and wind energy, the water. So from heat comes fire, and then because of the fire, the water boiled, and then the other elements like earth is formed. This is what is said. So this is what is said in our tradition. So I just wanted to give you an idea about what we say. And what Rinpoche, you said is that the things began from the space particle. Is it, so that space particle, is it a compounded object or thing or not? So within the compounded object, which one is it? Consciousness or so where does it begin? So as I said, so 1/49th of a size of a barley or rice is said to be the subtlest particle. So it does. Can that be also taken into your tradition? So with regard to whether it's compounded or not compounded, when we talk, the fact that we use the term particle, I mean, it is a particle and it is a compounded phenomena. So as I said, it is that source. That space particle is the source of all the external objects, elements, and so forth, and into which everything dissolves. And it is potential from which everything arises, and everything else also dissolves into it. And again, from that subtle potential space particle, the next formation of world systems also form. And so there's no beginning and no end to this. We cannot posit a beginning to this space particle, nor an end. So when we talk about the used word terms dulten, small particles, it is said that 7 of the subtle dultarab makes 1 dulten. So you were asking about the size of the particle, that particle that I referred to, the subtlest particle. According to Abhidhamma Kosha, within 1 grain of barley, you cannot, I mean, it's 49 particles is not enough. The subtlest, smallest particle So within 1 particle, it's mentioned that the 10 billion or something like that is forms 1 dulten. So since the space particle is potential, we can say it's an abstract phenomena called non-associated form.
타니라 몽고도 니네 간조 세워시키 작음들어 인자다 리보체 가리 숭바데 간조 고투 인산 제와티스 리기도 된 광다야 시리바데 졸라 간조 제와치 마땅바 인자
So I would like to apologize to the scientists that because we don't understand your questions, your presentations, and in our translation, therefore we do not have any questions. So in Abhidhammakosha, there is the explanation of how things are formed. The gross objects are formed. And earlier, Rinpoche mentioned that when the attractiveness of a flower appears to the consciousness, it is the reflection of that attractiveness is the reflection of the consciousness which sees it. Is that reflection is that reflection a form, a physical object, or not? Is that not Rinpoche, you were talking about it being not a Dilton or a subparticle. How I presented myself in my presentation, how I explained this, when we see an attractive flower, so that attractiveness is, I have used the term only, that attractiveness is not only because of the compounding or conglomeration of the particles. So there is no flower, strictly speaking, there is no flower which is formed or which grows or arises merely because of the particles, external particles coming together. I gave an example. So when we give some analogy or example, we can only give one at a time. So this is an example that I was giving, a flower being a physical, the physicality, the flower as such, and then the so I use the term, it's not merely because of the conglomeration of coming together of the particles that the flower is formed. So I made that distinction.
Rinpoche, exploring an idea of quantum physics in Buddhist terms, the idea of a particle coming into existence when it is measured. Now, as we know, the definition of mind is that which is clear, luminous, and knowing. And I'm just wondering whether in this miasmic, semi-existent, undifferentiated, dependent origination, could it be the luminosity of mind which locates, projects, and identifies, and hence, therefore, creates a particle?
Does mind have language? For instance, if subtle mind has...
Can we just please answer this question, if you don't mind?
So the definition of mind is mere being experience and luminous. So why is that so? Is, if you ask this question, it's the nature of the mind itself. There's no, I don't know if we need any other reason for that. So does this mind become can this luminous mind be a cause of the external objects? Is the question that you're asking, is it? According to Chittamatra philosophy, everything is in the nature of mind, and everything that appears all the objects are mere reflection of our mind, and therefore the physical objects and the other external things have their cause in the mind itself. So in Asanga's text, this is clearly mentioned. So I don't know if this mere luminosity is said to be the cause of all the things around us.
Thank you, Kishil Hadullah. As well as I thank the speaker, Kishi Losantembe Gyansenla, Venerable Yangten Tuku, for the wonderful session. I humbly request them to take the seats in the front row. There's a slight change as the book release has been shifted for tomorrow. So we have a last session. And the last session that we have today is a session which will be a presentation by Venerable Gishi Chisa Tungjen Tuku, who will present on the two truths, Parasangika Madhyamika perspective. And the chair is the Venerable Professor Kishi Ngawan Santala. Thank you. So sorry for the last changes. Thank you.
Now we have here Venerable Kishi Chisar Dungchen Tugu, and he will be presenting on two truths according to Prasangika Madhyamika perspective.
So first of all, my root guru, who is inseparable in nature from the incomparable Buddha Shakyamuni, I prostrate to you, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, the omniscient guru. And so here, the scholars and the geishis and the representatives of and the scholars from the different religious traditions, and also other educators and professionals who have gathered here. So I take this opportunity to pay my respects to you and my greetings. And my topic is the two truths according to the Prasangika Madhyamaka perspective, the basis level of truth. As we had since this morning some masters giving their talks, so I hope the audience have actually understood what was said by them, and I don't want to repeat what has been said. So with regard to the philosophical schools in Buddhism, there are the philosophical schools of the Shravakayana and Mahayana. And within the former, there are the Vaibhashikas and Swatantrikas, and within the later category, there are the Chittamatra and Madhyamikas. So, although the Geshe-las would know these, the Buddhist scholars, but there are people for whom what I would say would be beneficial. And so with regard to Vaibhashikas, it is said that the Vaibhashikas are the ones who propound their philosophical positions, assertions, following the Mahavibhasha treatise. And then the Swatantrikas are those who follow the sutras of the Buddha and define their philosophical assertions. And Chittamatras are those who assert that things are merely in the nature or reflection of the mind, and that there's no external phenomena which are formed from the gathering or collection of particles. And so, the Chittamatras are those who are the ones asserting that everything is in the nature of the mind. Whereas the Madhyamakas are those who assert that things have no true existence. So this is how I define these four different schools. Within the Madhyamakas, there are the Savatantrika Madhyamakas and the Prasangika, the autonomous school of Madhyamaka, and the consequential school of Madhyamakas. So there are within the Tibetan traditions those who differentiate between Prasangika and Savatantrikas, and there are those who do not. And I come from the school which does differentiate between the Savatantrika Madhyamakas. And Savatantrika Madhyamakas are those who assert that the three modes of our logical reasoning have an objective existence, whereas the Prasangikas are those who do not assert any objective existence in the three modes of the reasonings or logical reasonings, but they use mainly the prasanga or consequence. In other words, the reductio ad absurdum logic. So, if we have to build construct a building, we need a very firm foundation, without which the building will not stand. And so, likewise, with regard to Prasangikas, they present what is in reality, in nature, in reality, and then they define or explain the path, the process of the development of the path system. And in relation to that, there is the practice of religion and philosophy. So both the philosophy and religion are taken together or fused. So we can make distinction of, Holiness usually makes this distinction between the Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy and Buddhism, Buddhist religion. And so when we do, of course in Buddhism, when we do practice of Buddhism, it is connected with the philosophical stance. So as religious practitioners, without taking the philosophical teachings into practice, we cannot define philosophy as such apart from the practice. And so, with regard to the basis level, there are the two truths. The presentation of the two truths within which everything else is subsumed. So they are the conventional and the ultimate truth. So there's no phenomena whatever that cannot come within these two categories, under these two categories. So what do we mean by conventional truth? So when did how does the Prasangika define it, and when did the Prasangika's Madhyamaka evolve? Or so the English translation is not finished, so I'm going to give my presentation in Tibetan with the PowerPoint presentation, and I do not know English as well. So with regard to the philosophical tenet or philosophy of concept of Prasangika Madhyamaka, who actually started this tenet? It was the trailblazer of the Prasangika Madhyamaka tradition, a system of philosophy, is Master Chandrakirti. He lived in the 7th century and founded this school of thought with his writings, a lucid word commentary on the root verses of the wisdom of the middle way, and or Prasanapada Vritti, and then other texts by him, like the Madhyamaka Avatara and the Madhyamaka Avatara auto commentary on this. So there are arguments back and forth with, amongst the different schools of thought, and without which, I mean, we cannot talk about, of course, we cannot have the different philosophical schools. And so this school, the Prasangika school, was pioneered by, or started by Master Chandrakirti, and after having trailblazed it, then there must be people who preserve or retain this, uphold this tradition. And so we have Chandi Deva, who was the author of the great text, the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, who lived in this 8th century. So by writing the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara and the Shiksha Samuchaya, Shandideva preserved this tradition of followed and preserved this tradition of the Master Chandrakirti. Although I have made a definition or some explanation or description of the Prasangika Madhyamaka, so Prasangika Madhyamakas are those who reject any objective existence in things or any independent existence in things, in any inherent existence in things. So here the term tsengi or the self-definition is not the same word as we use, which is the definition of something. So we are not using that term definition as such, but when we say self-defined objects, it is something which is rejected by the Prasangikas. And so this philosophical school, what kind of sutras, sources does this philosophical school have to support its position? And according to this school, the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma is subsumed as both provisional and definitive teachings, and the second turning of the wheel of Dharma is definitive teaching, and the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, for example, the Sandhi Nimochana Sutra, is a provisional teaching. And so the Master Chandrakirti founded this school based on the teachings that are found in the definitive teachings found in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma and second turning of the wheel of Dharma. And so, according to this school, there is nothing that exists essentially or so this school also presents what are known as the three natures. So, but they are different from what are presented by the Chittamatras. These three so the terms, these three terms, which are called the dependent nature, the imputed nature, and the perfect nature, are also used by Chittamatras, but they are defined differently by this school of thought, the Prasangikas. If I have time, I'll go through this. So what is meant, according to the Prasangikas, what is meant by the conventional truth? So things that we can see, we can hear, and we can touch. So these, in other words, are said to be the conventional truth.
코랑배 원숨도 미기타바 능신 그 원숨도 또비가 아니 원숨지 체마텔이야.
So a perception which directly sees that object with duality, involving duality, is called a conventional object. So what is meant by duality here? So without some explanation, people won't understand. So the multiplicity, appearance of multiplicity of things, and then the subject-object gap between subject and object, and then there is also the appearance of generic image of things. So these are known as duality. When we look at some flower which is variegated in color, so all the different colors are seen by the visual perception. So when we so this perception sees the flower with multiple colors. And then with regard to how things are seen with gap between the perception and the object. For example, when we see a blue color, it's not just the appearance of that flower to the consciousness, the visual perception. So what appears is that there is this appearance of the flower, the blue, as if it has nothing to do with the perception of the blue. It is something out there. And then with regard to the generic image, appearance of the generic image, for example, when, for example, you see, let's say that you have seen a cinema, a movie, and in the movie many people are dancing and talking, conversing, and so after having seen that, when you reflect on that movie, you have these perceptions or the appearance. So without the appearance of those people dancing and talking and so forth, and you don't have that perception in your mind, the conceptual mind. So there is this generic image that is formed on the conceptual mind. So those things which have to be realized with duality. Duality in terms of these three types of duality are conventional phenomena. So the multicolored object and the blue, and then for example a vase are the objects of the perceptions which have seen them. But having said that, although a vase is a conventional truth, I mean, it doesn't mean that the minute you see a vase and that it is a vase, to know that it is a vase, that you have understood what conventional reality means. So, to understand that, the multicolored flower or the blue flower are conventional truth. Why are they called conventional or kunzop or samvriti? So it is because there is this obscuration in that perception or the object whereby it obstructs you to see the ultimate reality directly. So why are they called kunzop or obscured phenomena? Or so the Tibetan term zop, kunzop, zop has the meaning of obscuring or veiling something. So it is, that means that these things actually veil our mind from seeing the ultimate reality directly. And it's like if you have a mirror that you look at, but the mirror is rather tainted, and then you look at it and your face doesn't reflect very clearly. And so that the taint is like the dzop or the obscuration. And therefore, since in our mind there is this the veiling of the mind from seeing the ultimate truth, I have some quotations to give the sources of my presentation. So with regard to this Gunzop or conventional truth, what kind of categories are there within this? And with regard to this, there is the differentiation or the categorization of Gunzop Dempa or conventional truth into the conventional truth which are perfect or correct in the from the perspective of the worldly perception. So, for example, when in the world people are able to see that the reflection of one's face in a mirror is not the face itself, whether you are educated or learned in the different philosophical systems or not, in this system of Prasankika Madhyamaka, I mean, generally speaking, where we have those that are true and false things. And so here, so as I have already explained about the conventional truth, and then there is the ultimate truth. So those who have never thought about or never to whom there is it never occurs that there is something called ultimate truth, or uneducated people. For such a person, when they are able to say, "Oh, this is true, this is the right thing, that is the wrong thing," they are able to, when they are able to make that kind of distinction. So those things which can be pointed to as being right or correct by someone who has no understanding of emptiness, they are called the Yangdak Gunzop, or and then those which, from the perspective of the world, worldly people cannot actually say that this is untrue. I mean, those are called Lokwe Gunzop. So, of course, whatever there is, in reality, everything is false, because there is the incompatibility between the appearance and the truth, appearance and reality. So my source is the Madhyamaka Avatara Bhashya, auto-commentary to Madhyamaka Avatara by Chandrakirti. So there are different examples or analogies that are given in the world for these two, the perfect or the correct conventional reality and the false conventional reality. And here there are the 6 perceptions, the subjective minds and their objects, which are seen by due to arbitrary erring conditions. And so, with regard to this now, if someone sees a form, a physical object with their eyes or a consciousness, the eye consciousness is correct or true, the conventional object, conventional reality in terms of the subjective mind, and then the form or which is seen is the true or the correct object. So another thing is that the false conventional reality, which is like those who have no understanding, whose mind has never been been directed towards the ultimate reality. Even when for such a person, when they are able to say that this is false, this is untrue, incorrect, then those objects are said to be incorrect or false from the perspective of the worldly perception. So with regard to the example for this is an eye consciousness which perceives a blue mountain, a mountain, a snow mountain which is blue. Another example here would be someone who has a jaundice, seeing the conch color, white color, as if there is a yellow color. Because of some imbalance in the lung or the internal energy, it is said that sometimes it could affect the eyes, and therefore someone could see a snow mountain as blue. So that is actually the blue, and the visual perception of seeing the blue snow mountain is a false conventional reality. So because of this arbitrary erring condition, there are the temporary ones and the deeply seated ones. So when someone has some kind of ophthalmic condition, it appears as if some kind of hairs are falling, or the snow is falling, even if there is nothing really happening. And so because of some error happening in the eyes, this happens. And then because of some jaundice, some people can also have the perception of yellow when they look at white objects, such as when they look at the white snow mountain or some conch. And it is said that if you eat the dadura poison and look at the land, it's said that the whole area that you look at is, appears as if it's all like gold. So within the erring conditions, there are the external ones as well as the internal ones. So internal ones are also there. So those conditions that I was talking about are the erring conditions that are within us, within a being. Whereas the erring conditions that are external are like the mirror or the cave, and because of the sun's rays falling on the some kind of a desert area. And so because of the mirror, we have the reflection of our faces appearing in it, and then because of the, then we have echoes coming from caves. So at in some seasons, like the because of the sunlight falling on the sand in a desert, it appears to some people that there is water over there. So there is the mirage, appearance of a mirage. And then because of certain magical incantations used by a magician, and having used that, because of the magician's certain magic, even if the magician might have a small stick or wood that would may be transformed or into some kind of horses or elephants and so forth, because of the substance, the magical substance used by the magician. And then sometimes when you eat certain medicines or certain drugs, and different things can appear. It's possible that things can appear to one's eyes. So there are the false objects and the false subjective minds that we could actually experience. And so these refer to what I've so far talked about refers to the sensory perceptions, but now with regard to the mental perceptions, I do not know how. So there are erring causes which cause conditions which cause error to the mind. Through this can be because of certain mantras and also medicines, and these could cause hallucinations in our mind. So that because of these hallucinations, you could also have, because of certain philosophical assertions of certain schools, you could also have completely contradictory views from what really is. So we say, let's say now with regard to the conventional truth, I mean, you could learn about a flower and say, oh, this is called a flower because of such and such reason and so forth. You may be influenced by certain philosophical tenets. And so those are considered as conditions which can cause erred or mistaken views. So I have given some examples of what is meant by the conventional truth, and now with regard to the next truth, the ultimate truth, why is there need to explain the conventional truth? There's a very profound reason, because in the Madhyamaka Avatara it is said that the conventional truth is the means to lead to the subtle ultimate ways in which things exist, the ultimate truth, in other words, to lead to that. For example, to know the table very well, we need to be introduced to the table. Someone who doesn't know what is meant by a table cannot talk about it. So someone who doesn't know about the table, what a table is, cannot talk about the particles, what kind of particles has made it up, or what kind of parts it has, and so forth. So once we know the table, then we can talk about the table, we can talk about dividing it into parts and so forth. And so you can go into the subtler parts and still go into the subtle particles and so forth that this object is made up of. When we were born, of course, we do not understand anything. we could just suck our mother's milk, and then as we received education, our perceptions also change, and our perceptions also change to a higher perception, higher ways of looking at things. And therefore, after having learned what conventional truth is, then we could know that, oh, this is not the real way in which this thing exists. It has been deceiving me so far. I have been latching on to the appearance, and therefore you would go into the understanding of the real nature or the ultimate nature of the object, the table. And so Master Nagarjuna said that if someone is thirsty and wants some water to quench the thirst, the person has to have a cup and then request water to take into that, and then you can take the water and quench your thirst. So the conventional, the cup is like the conventional truth, and then your quenching the thirst is finally like the analogous to the an analogy to the ultimate reality. And in Bhaviveka says that the roof of a house is the ultimate reality. In order to get to the top of the house, the roof of the house, of course, if you have magical powers to fly and land on the top or something like that, it's a different case. But and then the stairways that lead to the top of the house are taken as the analogy for the conventional reality. So, by understanding the conventional nature of things more and more, subtler and subtler, then it is said that one can reach the point of seeing the ultimate reality. And so, Bhaviveka says that the top of the house is like Buddhahood. So the roof of the house is also taken as the stage of Buddhahood, where you have the purification of all the negativities, all the defilements on the mind, and also the reaching the Swabhavaka Dhammakaya. So the ultimate reality is the mere absence of the mere what appears, the apparent. So whatever is devoid of inherent existence is not necessarily ultimate reality, but that mere absence of the inherent existence in things is the mere absence of the independent or inherent existence in things, as His Holiness has said this morning, is the ultimate reality. So this is an object, ultimate reality is an object which is an object of seen by a valid cognition which is devoid of any duality. So we have to develop this to reach that kind of a stage, to see things without any duality. I mean, we need to progress along the path, and then we should have to reach the path of an Arya being, level of an Arya being. They are not like an ordinary people like us at all. So they have developed the single point of concentration higher and higher, and then reached that stage of seeing ultimate reality, emptiness, directly. And within that perception of the emptiness of the meditative equipoise of its Arya being, there is no duality of multiplicity, appearance of a multiplicity of things, nor is there any gap between the subject and the object, duality, and so they. So it is like seeing it is like actually seeing some objects that we see with our own eyes. When they see emptiness, there's nothing that veils that perception from seeing the emptiness directly. So that kind of stage has to be reached. So within the emptiness, there is the division into 4 or 16 and so forth. So why are these divisions within the ultimate reality made? Is because of different ways of perceiving the things in different beings. When somebody says, oh, this watch has no inherent existence, we would still hold on to it as having some intrinsic existence, and that is the grasping. And so that means which is able to overcome this kind of grasping at the true inherent existence is the antidote to it. Although ultimate reality can be categorized into these many numbers that I've already mentioned, but they boil down to 2. So there are selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena. So all beings who have breath, who breathe, are called beings. And so the emptiness or the selflessness of them is called the selflessness of persons, and the other phenomena, such as these objects around us, are called the emptiness of the phenomena, selflessness of phenomena. And so because in order to do away with the different misconceptions, we have different numbers of enumeration of the ultimate reality. So although I have so of course the Geshe-las do not need much explanation, but I don't know if the other people in the audience are able to understand. So I feel that I've made some kind of presentation which you may have found some thing meaningful. So if I have said something wrong, I would apologize. I'd like to apologize. Because I am an ignorant person, my mind is veiled by ignorance, I apologize for the way I've talked. If I've not talked well, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Kishi Shisatuku. Now this, actually, the topic is very important, the two truths according to Prasangika Madhyamaka. The emptiness itself became a lots of very serious bone of contention after Buddha's teaching of the second wheel of the Dharma. In the first wheel of Dharma, he taught about the selflessness of person. And in the second Dharma, the discourse in Rajgir, Buddha gave teachings on the selflessness of phenomena, that nothing exists intrinsically, rejecting the inherent existence of every phenomena. So there was lots of argumentations and attack from other schools of that time in India. So this is something very rich in Indian context, that when Buddha proposed to give teaching on selflessness, and particularly the selflessness of phenomena, the absence of intrinsic reality, intrinsic existence, then there were lots of debates refutation from different other schools like Sankhya, Mimamsaka, Vedanta, and Nayayikas, and Jainas. At the same time, there were many refutations and attacks from within the Buddhist schools, like Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, and Vijnanavadins as well. So this was some kind of a very rich, the interaction that took place in India. Very rich and very extensive and intensive interaction that went for centuries in India. That is something, this is the richness and the beauty of Indian philosophical history that we can have a look, right? So basically, when we are talking about the emptiness, it is related to our daily life. And to have the view of emptiness is something that the view which ontological view or the objective view and the subjective view. In English we have a view, and at the same time in Tibetan we have tawa, but in Sanskrit you have the darshan and drishti, these two different words. And in order to clarify this concept, the darshan and the drishti, in some of the Tibetan scholars have coined term as yukitawa and yujengitawa. So the emptiness as the yukitawa, unless this becomes the emptiness, the reality of the phenomena, this is an ontological kind of reality. Unless it is translated or it becomes your subjective view, it is not going to make any implication in your life. So therefore, the main purpose of the whole enterprise of exercise in this regard is to come out of samsara, to come out of this suffering. Because all the sufferings come from the karma and the afflictive mind, defiled mind, and all this defiled mind are grounded on the ignorance, not understanding or realizing the ultimate reality, right? So therefore, this is a kind of basically based on the ultimate reality to have a proper, appropriate, and real actual perception of the world. So now I would like to invite some questions. We have 15 minutes. If you have some questions, please. No, Sorona.
The President Rinpoche and the Chair of the session, and also the Buddhist and scholars of science, as well as the rest of the audience. I don't have any deep questions, but a few questions just for clarification, wishing for some clarification from Rinpoche. When Rinpoche gave his presentation of the 4 philosophical schools of Buddhism, he said that you said that the Sautrantikas are described as such because they are the followers of the sutras, and this is what we usually find in our texts. But we also do say that by following the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, there are the Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas. And also similarly by following the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma and third turning of the wheel of the Dharma, we have the Madhyamakas and the Chittamatras. And so why do you specifically say that the Sautrantikas are those who are followers of the sutra? And then with regard to conventional reality, you said that conventional realities are those things that we can see, which are tangible, which we can hear, and so forth. So that is okay. There is no logical fallacy there. But you also said that there are things that that can be perceived or realized within the mode of generic image. But in that case, even the ultimate truth also, initially when we realize it, we have to depend on inference, and therefore it involves generic image there in realizing this self ultimate reality as well. So may I ask you another question? So what is said in the first turning of the will, the Dharma, the selflessness. So with regard to definitive and provisional teachings, there are different ways of categorizing these two, delineating teachings as being either definitive or provisional. But Rinpoche, your presentation pertains to the Madhyamaka, Prasangika Madhyamaka philosophical school. So with regard to the selflessness taught in the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, from the point of view of Prasangika, we also need to differentiate between the selflessness taught, which is the taught in the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma. As in my presentation, I was not so much concerned about being very precise as we usually do that during the debating courtyard. I was not concerned about that. So here the Geshe-las and the Rinpoches and of course, I do not need to explain these things that I have presented to you, but for those who are not even used to the different terminology that we are used to so much in our debate courtyards, for them, and also those who have not, I have not also concerned myself to be precise using the logical procedures where you say if something is A, it should be B, and if something is B, it should be A, and so forth. These kind of logical extensions, pervasions, I was not so much concerned. And so I wasn't making my presentation within this kind of a rubrics that we usually are used to in our debating courtyards. And so I was mainly giving my presentation for the sake of the general audience here who are not uninitiated in these kind of logical procedures that we are used to. So, of course, with regard to Sautantika, as you said, all the the question was why is Sautantika particularly ascribed as being those following sutra? But I have not seen any clear explanation, but this is what we usually say. Although all the philosophical schools do follow sutras, but the generic term follower of sutra is may have been ascribed to the Sautrantikas, as we usually have this kind of custom. So it's I was not so much saying that because the other schools are not following sutras, but Sautrantikas are following sutras. I wasn't making my presentation from that point of view, but merely to give an idea of the term itself, to describe the term itself. And then with regard to duality, one of the duality that I've mentioned was the duality of generic image. that is formed in conceptual thought. So when we see a vase is seen as a conventional reality, and from the point of view of being able to see that within the mode of generic image. So I wasn't here also being logically or philosophically precise when I made this presentation, but just for the sake of the general audience here. So of course there is difference in subtlety between the selflessness presented by the four schools of tenet, and the Prasankika's selflessness is much subtler than the other schools' description of selflessness. And so thank you, Rinpoche. And with regard to the conventional and the ultimate truth according to Prasangika, and then within this conventional truth, you made the distinction between the conventional truth, which are correct, and false conventional truth from the perspective of the worldly perspective. In Madhyamaka Avatara, there is a mention of these two, when making these two distinctions, the mind, which is a subjective mind of a conventional phenomena, which is not realizing emptiness, is an object of such a mind is said to be a false conventional, whereas the mind which is directed towards emptiness is able to, which has seen, not seen emptiness, but which is able to confirm that something is false, that is correct. Correct conventional reality. So, for example, when we see a reflection of our face in a mirror, so I think that the perception of the reflection of a mirror face in our mirror is valid cognition, whereas according to you, whether it is a false conventional reality from the perspective of the worldly perspective. So this is an important question. So I wasn't really saying that someone who has not realized emptiness from the perspective of such a person's view, that there is the when someone is able to confirm that there is a disparity between appearance and reality. I may have some words may have slipped out of my mouth, but I may have had a slip of tongue. But so with regard to this analogy of seeing a reflection of a face in a mirror, many people, when they see that the reflection, they feel that there is a face there. So there is the appearance of the face in the reflection as face. So for someone, like even for a kid, of course, that is what it appears. The reflection appears as if it's a face. It's the face. But even nomads or farmers can say that that's not a face, that's just a reflection. And therefore, and so people can also look at the reflection of a face in the mirror and say that, when they see some blemishes on their face, they can say, those blemishes that are reflected there is not a real blemish, but still it functions to help the person to get rid of the blemish.
There's no more question, so I like to ask a question, but I would like to say it in Tibetan. Sorry, because of that.
term. I don't know about the philosophical term that much.
So may I ask a small question to Rinpoche? It's not because the question is not because of my perspective or how I view things, but it's just I want just clarification. So Rinpoche was talking, you were talking about the conventional way of the mode of existence of things and the ultimate mode of the existence of things. So if there is a conventional way in which things exist, then how do you actually posit an ultimate mode of existence of the thing, and vice versa? Because one is false and the other is true. So please explain so that we can actually posit both. So whatever exists as a phenomena, as Madhyamaka Avatara says, there are these dual natures in everything. So the question may arise in someone's mind. I mean, how do you posit both these truths, conventional and the ultimate truth, on emptiness, in relation to an emptiness? Although the things like vase and table and so forth, in relation to them, we may not have that kind of qualm. And so the conventional reality of emptiness is the fact that emptiness is an existence. So the existence of emptiness is the conventional reality of emptiness. And so when we talk about these two truths, as long as someone accepts an ultimate truth, it's not the case that when we say an ultimate truth exists, it's not the case that all the rest of the things are nullified or completely disregarded. But while accepting the conventional realities, then we actually go into deeper and deeper into the real nature of the things and therefore reach at the ultimate reality. So it's not the case that by accepting one, we actually deny the other, and vice versa. So when we talk about a vase or a table, we have the object, and then the scientists, on the basis of that object, and then the scientists could go into the subtler parts of that vase or the table, and still go deeper into the subatomic particles and so forth. And so earlier, in the beginning, we talk about this rectangular table or something, but that perception of the rectangular table does not serve as an opposite or some kind of obstacle to see the particle nature, parts, the smaller parts and the particles and so forth of the table. But when we say that things do not have any ultimate existence, what that actually gets at is that things do not exist the way they appear to us. There is this appearance of the objects, but the appearance itself is not the object, the reality. And therefore, by having the appearance in relation to, or based on the appearance, we can go into the deeper, ultimate reality.
Who is requesting to give an opportunity for a very small question. So the earlier question about why the Sotantikas are called the followers of Sutra.
My greetings to everyone. Rinpoche explained about the two truths, and in relation to that, my question is, which is important, in the Heart Sutra, it is said form is empty, emptiness is form, and form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than form, the fourfold emptiness. So in relation to this, so in Korea and Chinese languages, so the sequence of these four phrases are put in such a way that the form is not other than emptiness and emptiness other than form. These two are taken first, and then the form is empty, emptiness is form is taken later. So if it is the case that everything has these two truths, then the way the sequence of this phrase is put in these Chinese and Korean languages must be the case, the true. So my real question is, so the question is getting long, so I'm sorry for being long, because I already said that my question would be, I have a short question. So my question is, you said that the conventional truth is a means to get to that, the ultimate truth. So how does that relate to the fourfold emptiness? As Rinpoche Geshe-la has said, so we all recite these lines from the Heart Sutra. So I do not have any scriptural support, but what I usually understand is that by this phrase, which says form is not other than emptiness and emptiness is not other than form, refers to the fact that these two, the true truths of conventional and ultimate truth, are of same essence, but not of the same isolate or distinction. But they are not in a the sequence that is given is not because of how we realize the sequence in realizing emptiness. But I have seen in Bodhicitta Vivarana of Nagarjuna, where it is mentioned that the ultimate and the true truths are of the same essence, just like compounded phenomena and impermanence, as it is mentioned in that text. So, of course, there is this degree of subtlety and understanding the true truths in all the four schools of tenet. But despite the difference in their understanding, so all the schools do posit the two truths.
Thank you very much, Geshe Chesa Rinpoche, for his presentation, and also thank all of you, the eminent scientists and the philosophers, for having this, for being here, and for a very long day, and for your attention and participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geshe Ngawan Samdalna, and also thanks to Venerable Geshe Chesa Trungchen Tukula for the wonderful session. We also express our deepest gratitude to His Holiness for gracing us with His presence and providing His most precious time to us. We also thank all the eminent speakers and the chairs of all the sessions, along with the discussants for today, and our gratitude to the Vice-Chancellor and the Rector for their addresses, and our gratefulness to all the participants who made this day a major success. We also apologize for the abrupt changes that had to be brought about. Tomorrow's program will begin from 9:30 a.m., where from 9:30 till 10 we will have the book release. From 10 to 11:30 we will have the first session, where the speakers are Professor Sundar Sarukai and Venerable Gishi Jangchup Sangela. The discussion chair will be Professor Arthur G. Zazonk. From 11:30 till 12:30 is the next session by Professor Mahan Maharaj. On the discussion chair will be Professor Somak Ray Chaudhary. From 12:30 till 1:15 will be lunch. And from 1:15 till 2:15 will be the last session by Professor Arthur G. Zazonk. The discussion chair is Professor Anirban Chakraborty, followed by a tea from 2:15 till 2:45. And lastly, 2:45 will be the concluding ceremony. Hence, we hope to see you all. Thank you and good night. Thank you. And also, please, if one is not coming tomorrow, please return the badges in the reception counter. Thank you.